So it sounds to me like what you're saying is that the protocols and the projects that we've kind of seen to this point are one of two categories. You can think of them either like new species, derivative spin-off sort of things that are derived from Bitcoin, but that don't really add much to it. And then on the other side, you've got structures that build on top of Bitcoin and try to add more to it. Just sounds to me like you're saying that blockchain technology, at least in its current incarnation, doesn't really scale that well vertically. And so we need to be very concerned for efficiency reasons. And therefore, it makes sense rather than building everything into one Bitcoin, instead we make, 100 Bitcoins or 1,000 Bitcoins that all are able to interoperate with each other. And so therefore, we have a lot of redundancy in the system if one or multiples of them fail, right?
Mainly the idea is that, at the moment, it's partly a technological innovation and the progress of it. So lots of people seem to be interested in the potential for issued assets and smart contracts. They can see that could be a very interesting thing for the future, and that you can do sort of programmable trust, trustless escrow and other kinds of innovations built on top of it. But the question is, okay, how do you do that? Like if you'd asked most people early last year how you do that, Colorcoin was the answer. Then we had the alternate shares, like BitShares, Ethereum, Mastercoin, coming in and adding other stories between Colorcoin. So they were like separate networks or networks based on watermarking on top of the Bitcoin network. And I think the pegging technology is the next step of technological improvement, which allows you to get the effects they were after and reach the objectives that people are interested in, but in an interoperable way. So I think it is building on top of Bitcoin, and it's not starting a new thing. It's like directly interoperable with Bitcoin, but in a way which doesn't result in basically spamming or, like watermarking Bitcoin transactions so that every single share transaction or bid or ask ends up being a message on top of Bitcoin, saturating Bitcoin. So it turns out you don't need to do that, basically. You can make a sidechain which is pegged to Bitcoin, so you're still dealing with real Bitcoins with no counterparty risk. There's no escrow agent holding your Bitcoin. Your Bitcoin is just able to move between networks which are tied in the sense of being merge mined. And then people can do their innovation in an interoperable way. So I think the loose analogy would be like in the early days of TCP/IP, if every time somebody wanted to make, media streaming, web pages, online shopping, each time they'd made a fork of the TCP protocol, changed a few parameters so that it was an incompatible network, and said, great, we've done online shopping. And then you'd find out that none of these things talk to each other, and you'd have to pull them out and put them back in again to even achieve anything. So you get network effect by having interoperable systems. So if we can have different people innovating on different aspects, micropayments, online shares, high-frequency trading, to do all these things in different networks, but that are open networks, preserve the freedom to innovate, and fully interoperable at the Bitcoin level across two-way pegs. I think we kind of get the best of both worlds. We get the open freedom to innovate, and we avoid the silo effect where each network is separate, and we avoid these kinds of possibly self-defeating sort of selfish new share issuance situations that some things end up being built on.
Part of what's critical about this is for the community as a whole. We don't want to see another Mt. Gox happen. And it wasn't only Mt. Gox. Exchanges have had an incredibly high failure rate, either through theft, incompetence, or internal malfeasance. And we need to see the entire infrastructure. Although there are new players in the industry who are standing up and saying, we're doing security audits, or we're investing more in security, and we're doing things different, they're still operating off blockchain on a trust me model, usually holding private keys or security in a trusted entity. And we need to extend the trustless infrastructure of the blockchain to more parts of the ecosystem, but you can only do that if the blockchain can actually scale to have more of every interaction dependent on the blockchain. Because some of the exchanges, for instance, internally were doing more than 7 transactions per second. And so there was, aside from how they designed themselves, there was a very practical limit to what they could do on the blockchain. And so it became just easier for everyone to do things off blockchain. And that leads to an IOU situation where you don't own your Bitcoins. You just agreed that someone promises not to run away with them. And that's not good for this ecosystem.
I mean, it's actually not really using the features of Bitcoin. I mean, what Bitcoin and smart contracts offer is the ability to build, infrastructure, services, exchanges, payment processors, to build all these ecosystem components in a decentralized way, in such a way that you can get service without having to trust the service operator. As I see it, that is the interesting new property of smart contracts in the Bitcoin model. And almost all of the system players are not using it. So partly that's because it's more complicated and they were just trying to do some simple Web 2.0 stuff. But it's also, as Austin said, somewhat an artifact of the transaction rate limit. So if we can get sidechains running that can support higher transaction rates and avoid the centralization risk by the ability to move coins back to the other network, you should be able to build, for example, a Bitcoin exchange which doesn't hold your coins. So it's possible for the users to atomically swap coins using an atomic swap property, which is a known property but not very widely used. And then the exchange can just be matching orders. And so that can basically remove the need for audit. I mean, audit is after the fact reactive. If we'd had audits every 6 months on Mt. Gox, that doesn't necessarily mean that the situation would have been avoided, because the situation probably arose within a 6 month interval. So the point of Bitcoin is that you have real-time audit, basically. That if somebody tries to do something outside of the smart contract, like to have an exchange that tries to take the money, or you agree to an order for somebody to try not fulfill their part of it, it's a priori prevented and real-time audited, so that at the end of the transaction, you know what's happened, rather than finding out 6 months later that an exchange lost all its money. So by architecting these things in a way where you don't have to trust them, you can basically trade with air gaps. So like offline wallets, like hardware wallets, Armory wallets, the Armory offline wallet on the user side, and also the server, if it's hacked, it doesn't really have any assets at play. So as long as you spot check the prices that you're agreeing to, there's not really that much bad that will happen in this model if an exchange is compromised.
So the exchange never has your keys. They just handle the order matching now in this paradigm. Is that right?
That's right.
That's right. So they can compete on marketing, on building liquidity and volume. They can compete on customer service, regulatory compliance, based off the new IRS ruling, making it easier for you to file your taxes. There's a whole bunch of things they can innovate on, but the basic security model isn't trust us with your assets. It's trust us to deliver a great marketplace where you can find the best liquidity and the fastest and best customer service, but you never need trust us with your assets.
So I think I mentioned this to you. I have like 10 projects that I'm consulting on that are all in the user-created asset space, and they're on a variety of the projects that were out there. I don't pick favorites. I don't pick teams on this stuff. I'm looking for the best solutions. So, is this a solution that is available or will be available in the near future? And if I have, these 10 projects, some of which are like Kickstarter type tokens, and others are more like IPOs or equity sort of things. And some are just kind of like a charity project. So would each one of these get its own chain? Would I launch a chain for all of my projects? Would I use a specific chain that you're thinking is going to be out there? How would this work?
Around this, we had focused for the last 2 months on the core science, because we gathered a number of the Bitcoin core developers from around the world, many of whom who hadn't even met each other. And we set up a house in California where they all came and collaborated. Some of them lived in the house. And a number of them came into we were kind of calling it the Bitcoin mansion. It wasn't a mansion, but it was a big house. A lot of them came into the Bitcoin mansion and said, this is not possible. We don't believe in this approach. The ability to do a two-way peg and retain all the properties and build a security firewall around Bitcoin is impossible. We've now proven it is. We've gotten sign-off and support from a lot of the Bitcoin core developers, but even that change is going to require some time. because there's a community at large that needs to understand it. There's a proving period that needs to be there. And, these guys are incredibly overlooked, unfortunately, I think, by the ecosystem that depends on them. And they're volunteers, by and large, who are controlling some of the most important code on the planet, I think. Next to like space shuttle, if we have a whole bunch of space shuttles and space stations blowing up, it can ruin space exploration. If they mess up, they can ruin math-based currencies or set them back incredibly far. And so they have to be very judicious and patient in adopting changes.
Right. Actually, and that point tends to lead to contention. And I saw it myself last year. So when I was talking to Andreas, I explained a whole bunch of ideas that I'd come across and some that I'd invented myself that would make interesting new features for Bitcoin. And once you get in that mindset of like, okay, this would be cool, it seems to work. Because after a while, they can't really afford to entertain your pet project, even if it's a very cool project, because they're protecting $10 billion worth of assets, and if they accidentally introduce a bug while adding your cool feature, that everybody will have a bad 5 years in the cryptocurrency space. So it means that it's actually the innovation on the core is actually slow. I mean, literally, the pace of innovation is slow because it's conservative and value preserving and focused on robustness, fixing minor bugs, that kind of very careful, gradual change. So the idea with a two-way peg, so the two-way peg itself requires a moderately high-risk change to Bitcoin itself. So that's a kind of bootstrap problem that they have to evaluate this change or set of changes and be very sure that it's safe. But once that's done, it allows people to do innovation on sidechains. And so they can, different people can explore different properties on different sidechains. So if Zero Cash wants to do something, they could go do it on a sidechain. If somebody gets, in 6 months starts to have a big argument about increasing the block size, well, they can go do that on a sidechain. And maybe the main Bitcoin network wants to even reduce the block size to increase decentralization. If somebody wants to do something, with changing the contracting language, explicit support for coloring, i.e. tagged issued assets, which are SPV compatible, they can do that on another sidechain. And people with different views about what contracting language should be can do it on different sidechains. So it basically frees up the space to allow innovation, open innovation more rapidly without creating risk for Bitcoin main, because basically the security firewall guarantees that if you elect to move coins into a sidechain, you are exposed to bugs on that sidechain that affect value. Obviously, people will be very careful on that. But the people with money in the main Bitcoin chain and other competing sidechains are unaffected by that bug. There's an absolute firewall. So the way that works is you can only move coins back that have been moved out. So, if somebody puts one Bitcoin into an experimental sidechain and something goes wrong and somebody takes it, well, they lost the Bitcoin. But the main Bitcoin network is unaffected and can't be affected, basically.
The value of a Bitcoin, regardless of what chain it currently resides on, is still one Bitcoin, right? The value does not float against other chains of Bitcoin. Right.
There's an actually implemented protocol where you can move the Bitcoin. You've got Bitcoin on one chain, you want it onto another chain. Now, for efficiency, when there's sufficient market demand floating around, you might swap with somebody who wants to move in the other direction. But you have the ability to actually move the Bitcoin you possess directly onto the other chain.
So this is a flexible money supply implementation then, yes?
It's still fully preserving the 21 million cap and the supply function. So actually, it's only the main Bitcoin network that is mining and creating new coins. The other sidechains are just repositories for coins. So you can move Bitcoins out of the main network into them and back out.
Is there a financial motivation for someone to merge mine one of these if there's no reward?
Good question, and we believe there will be. But some of those details we're not exactly disclosing. We're in discussion with a lot of the large miners and mining pools on making sure that they have good incentives and good reasons to merge mine this. There will be an economic model that supports participation and follows a lot of the same model of Bitcoin, it just won't be based off mining rewards. So obviously that leaves transaction fees. But there is a transaction model that is flexible, that's market-based, that would allow each of these sidechains to have their own innovations, but collectively, all of them together can increase the transaction fee revenue for people who are merge mining this.
I see.
And one of the other key points to remember is what's great about this idea that really I enjoyed looking at it from a large scale complex systems design and merchant property is it will actually drive demand for Bitcoin and increase the utilization of Bitcoin, because now you have a whole bunch of other interesting assets that can be or contracts that can be written against Bitcoin. And so you can imagine once, we've had some discussions with some very, very large financial institutions who are looking at volumes of transactions and contracts and derivatives and future options contracts that are like orders of magnitude larger than the entire Bitcoin asset base. Huge. And so when you start to be able to embrace or extend the functionality to include part of their asset base encoded in blockchain technology, you can start to see where the demand for Bitcoin will far outpace the availability and will ultimately drive up the price of Bitcoin, I believe.
Right. So, I mean, remembering that the Bitcoin's price is there's a speculative part which is looking at the future potential utilization, but largely Bitcoin's value is its utility value. So the fact that you can make transactions for flat fees and so on. So once somebody is able to bring to the market an open network for supporting smart contracts against other assets, that opens up a wider set of transaction types. So you would expect the transaction throughput to go up, the dollar value being transacted to go up. And as Bitcoin is the kind of neutral transactional currency of all of these sidechains, therefore the amount of Bitcoin denominated transactions goes up, which puts up the utility value of Bitcoin.
Bitcoin Expo 2014, presented by the Bitcoin Alliance of Canada, is just a week away. The conference will feature the key players behind Ethereum, CA Vertex, Litecoin, Open Transactions, Sean's Outpost, CoinTalk, Mastercoin, Dark Wallet, CryptoKit, Blockchain.info, QuickBT, Bitcoin Magazine, and many others, with special guest Andreas Antonopoulos as the Master of Ceremonies. Bitcoin Expo 2014, Toronto, Canada, April 11th to 13th. For tickets, visit bitcoinexpo.ca.